Okay, we're going to tackle two chapters today, chapter 2 and chapter 3. Uh, I thought McLovin being on this one would be apropos on chapter 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about ways of understanding and perceiving self, oneself and others. Practitioners must realize that each person constructs reality in their own unique way. This is called constructivism. Constructivism focuses on how individuals describe their experiences in terms of personal constructs. So the reality is, just because you think one way doesn't mean that everybody thinks the same way that you do. And this people need to understand this. And this is known as constructivism. Psychologists understand this, social workers understand this. If more people understood it, then maybe we would have less conflict. A personal construct is an explanation of an event or series of events that becomes the lens through which the individual sees the world. These constructs are developed as individuals interpret and give meaning to their experiences. Constructs are not consciously developed. You may watch news on Fox News, and that's how you interpret the world through what you hear on that channel. Or maybe you listen to NPR or CNN or MSNBC. These become constructs for you, and it helps you interpret what's going on. If you live on the Navajo Nation, potentially that is certainly that's part of your construct. Um, and You certainly will not have the same construct as somebody from Lost Nation, Iowa. Certainly not, or somebody from New York City, or somebody from Chicago, or somebody from Phoenix or Flagstaff. Even if they have the same genetic background that you have, they're indigenous and they're and they just have a different. They will tend to have a different construct because they are because they live in a different place, and their reality is completely different than yours. Social constructivists focus on how relationships, language, and context influence an individual's or a group's interpretation of self, others, and the world, and this becomes very important. Um, During World War II, we had a very difficult time understanding our enemy, the Japanese, mainly because their construct was completely different than Western constructs. The Japanese lived in a world that was very collectivistic. Um, there, just because you say something, if you're Japanese, just because you say something, it doesn't make it absolute. Uh, they're they're they say potentially they say yes to everything because they don't want to create social upheaval, but they will um, indicate to you that they really mean no by their facial expression. Of course, being from the West, Westerners think that everything that you say is absolute. And the reality is, of course, here we have the Japanese, and the Japanese think a little bit differently than we do. And this is one of the reasons why we didn't understand that the Japanese might attack Pearl Harbor in 1941. Uh, One of the reasons is because we thought that because they said they weren't going to do it, that they wouldn't do it. But of course, when they said that they weren't going to do it, their facial expression should have told us, yes, we might we might do this, and so we should have been more prepared than we were. But we are not the same as the Japanese, so we interpret things differently than they do. Personality is the individual's distinctive qualities, their traits, characteristics, and behavior patterns. Personality is a socially constructed idea. So if we lived alone, we wouldn't have any personality because there is no society to interpret how we are. Some of our strongest personality constructs are developed in childhood. These constructs tend to be harder to change because they're based on immature feelings and possibly illogical thoughts and are established by the undeveloped mind as truths. Uh, I don't remember why I put that picture in there. It has to do with child abuse. Childhood carryover. Mother, my child is intelligent, handsome, and funny. The child thinks I'm handsome, intelligent, and funny. And so that must be true. Father, he is too awkward to play sports. Son, that's true. I am bad at sports. So the individual will always be bad at sports because they don't think they can be good at sports. Their father said they couldn't. They're too awkward. Mother, no one will love you unless you are thin and beautiful. Daughter, true. I must lose weight and wear lots of makeup to cover my many flaws. And as you can see, this individual is trying to do that very thing, cover their many flaws. Parents, people not like us can't be trusted. Children, true. People are who are different are dangerous. And of course, these are all childhood things that we carry over from childhood. And this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to get rid of prejudice and racism. Because if you learn this as a child, it's very difficult to get it out of your mind. This is another reason, and you're going to hate me for this, but this is another reason why religions are so strong, because you learn them as children, and anything you learn as children becomes absolute, it becomes a truism. And so a religion that is taught to children has a strong carryover. So this is one of the reasons why religions are so powerful. Parents, you are worthless and will never amount to anything. Children, true. Why even try? I might as well be homeless and live on the street with my 2 dogs. Culture strongly influences words used to describe someone's personality. Minority cultures will sometimes accept the dominant culture's view of themselves as true and use that definition to evaluate themselves. And these, of course, are two T-shirts that show that very thing. My Indian name is Drinks Like a Fish. My Indian name is Crawling Drunk. And of course, those are two ideas that are purported by the dominant culture. Those who have been around indigenous people know that this isn't anywhere close to being true. So that is two very sad points. The constructivist perspective helps practitioners remember that their view of the world may be different from their client's view. The practitioner needs to remember to work within the client's view of reality. And of course, this is a picture from Jersey Shores. If you ever watch that show, you know that being Italian and living in New Jersey along the shore, I guess, I'm not really sure, but their concept of reality was very much different from just about everybody's. Now, the interesting thing is that Snooki, this is Snooki right here, this little short lady. Snooki is actually indigenous, and she is from, originally she's from Peru, and she was adopted into a New Jersey family, and of course, her suntan is real. She's a little darker complexion than anybody else, so her suntan, she didn't need to really suntan as much. Interesting person, Snooki, and I think we're going to talk more about Snooki, and I think that's her name. I think that was her name. She's only 4'9". Interesting person, because she kept losing and gaining weight, and now she's lost weight again. She's smaller than she was when she was on the show. Anyway, so you know that your reality isn't the same as what their reality was. Is it just a television show, or are they just following a script? And the reality is that their reality was very much different than anybody else's reality. When an individual, family, or group becomes aware of a construct that is unsatisfying or limiting, the individual can develop another meaning for events or experiences and begin to realize change is possible. but the idea is better if it comes from the client. So sure, you understand that things need to change, but what we need to do is get the client to admit that this is wrong and this needs to change. Um, uh, Child abuse, for example, just because I was raised being spanked a lot doesn't mean that I need to raise my children by spanking them a lot. Of course, sometimes a practitioner will have to work with pair bond structures that have very different individual constructs. A husband may believe that a wife should stay home and raise the children, while his wife might think that she would be able to go out and work. Now, oddly enough, this is not an argument, uh, a very common argument in today's society. But when I first started in psychology, this was the major argument between husbands and wives. I started in psychology in the 1970s, and this was it. This was the number one uh, conflict going on between men and women. Should she work, or should she stay home and raise the children? This argument had been going on since the beginning of time, I guess, but it wasn't until the 1970s that all this changed, that feminism became more powerful, and women uh, became strong enough in their position to strike out and go out on their own, or go out and work. And now, of course, that's so common for there to be an intact family. Both husband and wife works. As a matter of fact, it's probably rare to find a woman who doesn't work outside the home. Systems theory takes into account the entire system with which an individual interacts. A system is seen as a complex entity within which interactions are as important as the individuals. So we're talking about, well, we're going to talk about family systems in just a second, but let me go back to this point. So you can see that psychology has changed a lot from when I first started in the 1970s until today. This was a major argument. If you look at, I've got an old abnormal psychology book, and you wouldn't recognize it as an abnormal psychology book because the problems in there are not the problems that you see in Psych 241 today. Very much different. Even schizophrenia, the definition of schizophrenia was different. So things have changed because people evolve and ideas change, and problems that we had in the past don't exist anymore. In Freud's time, it was repressed sexuality that caused everybody's problems. Not so much today because, well, we express our sexuality a lot better than we did in the past. So a lot of things have changed, even in my lifetime. Uh, Even in my lifetime, and it will change in your lifetime. The longer you study psychology, the more you will see change. That's one of the reasons why we were working on the DSM-5. When I first started in psychology, we were in the DSM-3, and now we're in the DSM-5, and each one of them has changed the idea of what mental health and mental illness are. So when we talk about systems, the systems theory, we're talking about a system that is seen as a complex entity within which interactions are as important as the individuals. So the systems theory has to do with family systems, it has to do with work systems, and of course there are specific psychologists that work with families and work with industry. Industrial organizational psychology works with the organization dynamic. So we're talking about dynamics here. Rules are established by the family to teach what is expected or permitted by individual family members. The rules help regulate and stabilize how families function as a unit. I'm right now. I'm here. Thank goodness I get to live with my wife. This is kind of fun. While I was in Saley, of course, I was here and she was, I was there and she was here, and she was helping my daughter with my grandson, with our grandson. But we have rules. There are certain jobs that we do. I get up in the morning and I do my chores. I get to clean out the cat litter boxes. Lucky me. She cooks most of the meals. Usually, if there's cooking to be done in the for lunch or breakfast, I do it, and she usually cooks supper. What else do we do? We share loading the dishwasher and emptying the dishwasher. But they're family rules that we have. I do this, she does that. She buys all the Christmas presents. I just buy her Christmas presents, pretty much. Anyway, that's those are family rules, and every family has their own rules. Some of them are more traditional rules that go back into the 20th century when men didn't do housework very much. I do a lot of housework, but then again, maybe I'm not male. Changing one part of the family system will result in changes to other parts. If something in the family dynamic changes, like a wife getting a job to help with family finances, the homework distribution will have to change to even out the labor. So the husband will have to start doing more work. If she's home all day, she probably cooks and cleans. If she's not home all day anymore, then he probably should help cook and clean and help his wife with those chores. Family systems may be open or closed in various degrees. In a closed family system, the family exists in relative isolation, with communication taking place primarily between members. Change is avoided. Members hold on to established traditions and values, and this is known as a closed family system. So, because of the strong traditions on the Navajo Nation, I would say that probably the family system on the Navajo Nation, the more common family system is a closed family system. But of course, when we're talking about closed, we're really referring to an extended family clan structure more than just the immediate family. Characteristics of an open family system: willingness to assimilate new information and to engage in ongoing interactions with their environment. The family has no single correct way of doing things. As the family matures, changes are tolerated, supported, and celebrated. Once upon a time, the mother and father picked the spouse of the individual. Now, of course, the spouse may or may not select somebody to be a life partner. She may decide to just have babies on her own. A lot of things change. A lot of things have changed over time. So the open family system is a little bit more adaptive than the closed family system. In the family system's perspective, practitioners gain an understanding of how interactions with the family system affects clients. Family system assists clients in identifying reciprocal relationships between their behavior and influences of the systems within which they interact. Clients realize both how someone else's behavior is influencing them and how their behavior is influencing others. A lot of times you may have one more dominant individual in the family, and of course, whatever they do tends to affect everybody in the family. So if they start staying out all night, not coming home until the early morning, this will change a lot of things. They won't they won't wait for supper until the individual gets home. They'll have supper whenever. Whereas before, you may have had two parents who were authority figures. All of a sudden, you only have one because one parent is rarely there. So, one change of behavior can affect everybody in the family. The ecological perspective views people and their environment as continuously evolving. The ecological perspective is less concerned with cause and effect and more concerned with the transactions that occur between people and their environments. The ecological perspective was derived from the concepts of biological ecology. The structure enables practitioners and clients to think about the reciprocal relationship between people and the environment. Ecological perspective has three important components: person environment fit. Person environment fit refers to how well a person's needs, goals, and rights mesh with the social and physical environment. I've told you, well, maybe I was talking to the other class. I was born on a farm in Indiana. I'm a ruralist. I'm not an urbanist, and anytime I'm in an urban setting, I really don't feel comfortable. So a person environment fit. My fit would be a rural environment. Those of you who know me know that I live in a cornfield, and I live in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa. So I'm pretty kind of isolated here. Not really that much. I can certainly go someplace and find whatever it is I'm looking for. But as far as having people around me, that doesn't happen here. My closest neighbor is a half a mile away. So that's my person environment fit. Adaptations are the processes people use to sustain or increase the level of fit between themselves and the environment. And of course, when I lived in Hogan housing on the Saley campus, it was a little close for me. I had neighbors. I was living in a duplex. I'm not used to being able to hear anybody, and of course, I really couldn't hear them. But I had somebody right outside my front door, and I needed to adapt to that, so I did. I adapted as well as I possibly could. I like it better here where I don't have to worry about anything. There's hardly ever anybody at my house. About the only people that come to my house are my grandson, my daughter, and the UPS guy, the FedEx guy, and the postman. Uh, People rarely come to my house, so a little bit different. I don't have to. When I walk out the door, I don't see another family. There's nobody there. Life stressors are issues that exceed the resources of an individual to deal with them. In the ecological perspective, behaviors are not seen as dysfunctional or maladaptive. Instead, behavior is viewed as adaptations to improve the fit between the individual and the environment. The strengths perspective views all people as having strengths. It focuses on assets clients have developed throughout their lives. A strength is defined as any psychological process that enables a person to think and act in order to benefit himself or herself and society. Strengths are often developed when people struggle with difficulties, traumas, oppression, disappointments, and adversity. So, from difficulties, traumas, oppression, disappointments, and adversity comes strength. Everyone has the capacity to develop new resources, to make positive changes, and to use his or her competencies to solve problems. And of course, as things change, we need to adapt to change. We need to adapt new strengths. Our strength is our resilience or our adaptive ability to change with change. Um, so um, when I was born, computers were the size of rooms, and now, of course, we have computers in our telephones. So, I mean, people need to adapt to these things. When I when I was young, telephones were attached to the wall with a wire, and that wire ran out to a telephone pole outside, and that telephone pole was attached to another telephone pole, which was attached to all the telephone poles in the United States. So in order to make a call before, of course, you need to be right next to the telephone on the wall. And that's the only way you can make a telephone call. Now, of course, you can make a telephone call just about anywhere. We have satellites that connect us or that can connect one call and another, and so we can call just about anywhere. Lots of changes. I have problem. My telephone for some reason doesn't tell me when I get a text message. I was just texting my daughter, and I haven't been texting for very long, I'll have to admit, but I was texting my daughter and trying to find out if she needed me to take my son to soccer practice tonight. Um, and of course, that's me needing to change to be able to adapt. Strengths perspective invites clients to discover, think about, and figure out how to use their strengths. This is different from traditional counseling because they tend to identify deficits, weaknesses, and problems. In the strength perspective, we are looking for what they can do that other people don't do, or what a strength that allows them to adapt to new situations. And that's what we're looking at. We're not looking at deficits, we're looking at positives. When working with individuals, families, groups, or organizations, the practitioner looks for their strengths, identifies their resources, and invites them to focus on possibilities for the future. Now, the reality is that there's a lot of different people counsel, but strengths perspective is very big in social work. Psychology is always normally is looking for your problems and trying to fix your problems. But in social work, we're looking for the strengths of the individual and how they can adapt to new circumstances. Resilience perspective is the ability to survive and thrive in the face of overwhelming life challenges. Resilience is a dynamic process that is the outcome of positive adaptation in the face of adversity, risk, or stress. Resilience is not a fixed personality trait or an inborn characteristic. No one is either vulnerable or resilient all the time. Resilience is learned behaviors and patterns of adaptation. Resilience depends on the availability of protective factors. Risk factors are any influencing factors that can bring or predict negative outcomes on the functioning and overall development of the individual. They can include biological influences, individual influences, family influences, community influences. Protective factors are any factors that can exert either direct or indirect influences to buffer the negative effects of risk factors. Protective factors include your strengths, your capabilities, your talents, your coping skills, your resources, and your assets. One of the reasons that people of a higher socioeconomic status are able to be resilient is because they have the assets, they have the money to be able to do whatever they want. If I lost my house right now, I've got a bit of a nest egg that I could go and I could just check into a motel. I wouldn't have to worry about not having any place to sleep. But if I didn't have any money at all and I lost my house, where would I go if I didn't have any money? And it's because of my assets that I'm buffered against any problems like that. And of course, I'm a talented teacher. So anyway, resilience represents both a process and the outcome of competent functioning. Resilience as an outcome involves the interplay of risk and protective factors. Resilience as an outcome represents the resultant positive functioning and competence developed when facing adversity. So resilience perspective is part of positive psychology. Practitioners using the resilience perspective start with an assessment of the relevant factors and then focus on helping clients build on the resilience they have developed. Practitioners focus on helping clients develop a positive outlook on life and self confidence, maintain, promote, and enhance protective factors, recall successful events in their lives, identify resources, view a mistake or a window of learning as a win. I'm sorry, view a mistake as a window of learning. Why did I make this mistake? What can I do to keep myself from making this mistake again? It's a window to find out, to learn things. Focus on the present and the future and not on the past. That is the resilience perspective. The empowerment describes a process by which individuals, groups, and or communities take control of their circumstances to achieve their goals. Empowerment has an internal as well as an external component. The internal component of empowerment is also called psychological empowerment. It has control over your motivations, your cognitions, your what drives you, the thoughts that you have, and the type of personality that you have. Internal empowerment involves the belief that the individual will make competent decisions, solve their problems, achieve their goals, and have a significant impact on the environment. The external component of empowerment includes the tangible knowledge, competencies, skills, information, opportunities, and resources that allow a person to take action and actively advocate change. Empowerment, like resilience, is a process as well as an outcome. New competencies learned from experience leads to new feelings of empowerment. Research shows that the more involved an individual, the stronger the feeling of empowerment. My son just started a new job. I was talking to him last night. And over last week, he was able to finish a project by himself. Before they gave him manual after manual after manual so that he would learn how to do things. And now that he has been allowed to do something on his own, he feels empowered. He's really excited about the job. He was excited about the job before, but when he wasn't able to contribute to his job, he wasn't feeling nearly as positive about it as he does now. Now he feels empowered, so he's looking forward to increase his capabilities at the job now. He feels empowered. The empowerment perspective allows clients to develop a sense of power and competency as they experience using their skills and knowledge in new and challenging ways. And of course, that's what happened with my son. The empowerment perspective helps people discover their strengths, identify their goals, and develop a plan to reach their goals, allowing clients to accept responsibility for change and experience a greater sense of empowerment. And of course, one of the things you need to know about my son is that he just turned 50. He just turned 50. He just changed his job, and of course, he already knows that he can do things because he's been doing things for the last 30 years. But now that he's in this new job, and it's a very important job, it has to do with national security. He feels empowered, and he's looking forward to doing much more of what he did last week. The dual perspective views an individual as interacting and adapting to two surrounding systems or environments. The nurturing environment is composed of family, friends, and close associates at school or work. The sustaining environment consists of the people encountered in the wider community and the broader society. While most European Americans experience nurturing and sustaining environments as fitting together, other ethnic and racial groups experience a poor fit between them. Individuals in the non-dominant group constantly evaluate disappointments in life to determine whether they are based on one's qualifications or on racism from the dominant culture. Minority members must develop a dual perspective equating disappointments with the hostility of the broader society. Minority members must constantly shift between the home culture and the dominant culture to choose acceptable behavior in each situation. The dual perspective allows a practitioner to attempt to understand the structural barriers that those in other groups experience. This perspective makes the practitioner aware of the day to day challenges minority clients face. And that, of course, is McLovin. And that is the end of this chapter. But we're going to go on to the next chapter, chapter 3. Let me get rid of this. There we go. Values, ethics, and legal obligations. Oops. There we go. There's McLovin. Okay, so what do these guys have to do with values, ethics, and legal obligations? You'll see in just a moment. Values are preferred conceptions of people, outcomes for people, ways of dealing with people. These are your values. Personal values influences your way, the way that you view the world, your personal and professional philosophies and choices, your view of how people change. And of course, we can use McLovin as an example. Professional values often include principles of respect, self-determination, social justice, professional integrity. Areas where personal values may conflict with professional values include your religion, health, marriage and family, education, role of government, birth and death, and honesty. Ethical codes provide a brief explanation of what can be expected in the interactions between professionals and clients, as well as between professionals and other professionals. Ethical codes contain statements about what the professionals must and must not do. And we see these arguments from time to time, especially in politics, between the two conflicting parties, the Republicans and Democrats. But we see them all the time in other professional organizations. Lawyers arguing back and forth, prosecutors and defending lawyers. We see this in psychology. What's the best way to treat a client? Well, I was trained as a humanist, so is that better than is humanism better than cognitive behavioral therapy? What type of therapy should be used? These have to do with ethics. Helping Professions Organization, and this is a list of different organizations: the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, American Counseling Association. These are all professional organizations. American Psychiatric Nurses Association, American Psychological Association. This is the one that I belong to, the APA. But as you can see, there's American Counseling Association, Marriage and Family Therapy, the Psychiatric Nurses Association. Once upon a time, in between my first wife and my second wife, I dated an individual that was a psychiatric nurse. Was a very interesting person. Association of Addiction Professions. Why in the world did I tell you that? International Association of Marriage and Family Counselors, National Association of Social Workers, National Organization of Human Services. Those are all the professional organizations, and if you want to get a hold of these guys, that is their this is their internet address, their IPA, I think, or something. Professional competence includes practicing within the scope of competence based on education, training, professional credentials, and professional experience. So, what is my what are my credentials to teach this class? I have a master's degree in psychology, guidance, and counseling. So that gives me the expertise to teach a counseling class because I've been trained as a counselor. Professional competency and integrity, one of the most important aspects of professional competence requiring professional self-awareness is cultural competence. Cultural competence is defined as the application of cultural knowledge about individuals and groups of people to the standards, policies, attitudes, and practices of the helping process to result in better outcomes. These are the Navajo Code Talkers. They were honored at the White House by President Trump. And while he was trying to honor these individuals, he said something about he was trying to attack one of his political enemies, and one of his political enemies is Elizabeth Warren, who claimed to have Native American ancestry, and he calls her Pocahontas. He calls Elizabeth Warren. Trump calls Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas. And while he was honoring these guys, in his speech he talked about Pocahontas, which was really inappropriate. It was not culturally competent for him to do that, unfortunately. But of course, he was the president, so he did it anyway. Now he's not the president, so hopefully we don't have those kinds of errors, those cultural uh, faux pas out of Biden that we had under Trump. Confidentiality is vital for information shared by the client with this therapist in the course of treatment. This information is not to be shared with others. Without confidentiality, clients are less likely to disclose sensitive information with the practitioner. Why maintain confidentiality? The potential for clients to experience stigma, moral obligation for helping professionals to follow the ethical standards for a professional, model of acting with discretion and keeping one's word, legal requirements. Once upon a time, in the 1980s, we had another pandemic hit. That pandemic had to do with the AIDS virus. So the people being infected with the AIDS virus, of course, we didn't understand the AIDS virus. We didn't even know it was a virus when it first hit. We just saw these people wasting away and dying. Um, so one of the problems was that people were talking about individuals who were sick with the AIDS virus. Well, how did they find out? Well, eventually we came up with a test that identified them as being positive or negative for the HIV virus, for the HIV, which is human immunocompromising virus or something. Anyway, I was working in medicine at the time. And there was a huge question as to whether we could disclose this information to anybody. And of course, eventually they wrote laws and made it confidential. And that's where these hospital confidentiality laws came from. The HIPAA. That's where HIPAA came from the AIDS crisis, because people were disclosing who had AIDS and who didn't have AIDS. Well, of course, you can live with the AIDS virus for an extended length of time, and here these people were losing their jobs, and husbands were divorcing wives, or wives were divorcing husbands, whatever, because one of them had AIDS. It was a really serious situation. With the expansion of technology into all aspects of our lives, communication has become more and more difficult to regulate. We now have cell phones, fax machines, of course, answering machines, computers, internet sites, a lot of email stuff going back and forth. We need to limit sending confidential material on insecure lines. Boundaries are defined as borders that separate some types of entities, for example, parents, children systems, clients, service providers, and healthcare workers. We need to know the boundaries for all of these structures. In all helping relationships, maintaining appropriate boundaries is an essential part of developing a trusting relationship with a client. Relationship boundaries must be maintained with delicacy because a lot of these things have to do with things that people are embarrassed about. People don't like to talk about a lot of things. They don't like to talk about anything that has to do with sex. They don't like to talk about their bowel movements. They don't like to talk about how many times they urinated. There are a lot of things that people don't want to talk about. Sexual relationships with clients are forbidden by all professional codes and represent the most common ethical complaints against helping professionals. In one study, 7 to 8% of practitioners reported engaging in sexual intimacy with a client. Ouch. This is has to do with counseling. These are boundary violations. Sexual relationships can have a seriously negative effect on the client. Their cognitive can cause cognitive dysfunction. It can cause identity and boundary disturbances, sexual confusion, rage and feelings of guilt, depression and emptiness, self-destructive feelings, increased risk of suicide. And this is one of the reasons why you need to stay away from it. Touch, accepting gifts, and self-disclosure by professionals are behaviors that have potential to be boundary violations, depending on the circumstance. More damage can be done by overstepping boundaries than the help previously given. There is a difference between city ethics, rural and rural small town reservation boundary ethics. It is easy for a city practitioner to gravitate in different circles than their clients. In smaller communities, it can be nearly impossible. I was teaching psychology at a tribal college in Montana. The county that I was living in was the size of Delaware, and there were only 7,000 people in that county. There was one counselor in the county, and she literally counseled everybody. But of course, where was she going to live? She had to live in the county because, well, it was the size of Delaware. And if she had to drive in every day, it would have been way too far for her to travel. So the people that she was counseling were the people that she was living with. I mean, there were only two towns in the county, two two towns, and she was the only one. She had to live in one of the towns. Actually, she lived on a farm outside one of the towns. But eventually, who's she going to date? I mean, this is a lady from the East Coast. She'd come to Montana to work. There was an Indian reservation in the county, and she worked on the Indian reservation as well. What's she going to do? How can she stay away from all of these people? All the people that she counsels, she'd have to isolate herself, and of course, she didn't do that. So it was tough. It was tough. So if you live in New York City, if you live in Chicago or Flagstaff or Phoenix, you don't have to worry about running into any of your clients. But when you live in the rural environment, your boundary violations are completely different. The desire to help the people and the community that you were raised in is very strong. When you know the client before trying to help them, you are maintaining a dual relationship, and you should try to avoid this situation. If you knew the person before they came in for help, then you need to have somebody else do the counseling. That's known as a dual relationship. Be aware that if you take on this task, you are possibly in ethical violation. This is an ethical situation that you need to decide whether you can do or not do. One taboo in psychology is that you cannot counsel somebody who is in your family. So if that's your plan, if the reason that you are studying counseling is to help people in your family, forget it. It's just not going to happen. For one thing, you're tainted because you have too much background information on this individual, and they may have changed, and you may not accept their change. So don't do it. Don't counsel somebody that you're close to. Another challenge during your professional relationship is how much information about yourself you should disclose to the client. Self-disclosure should only be used in the best interest of the client, certainly not the practitioner. You're not counseling, you're not trying to help yourself, you're trying to help the client. So if it doesn't help them, then don't do it. After the dance is over, after the professional relationship is over, all ethical code strictures are removed. But a practitioner needs to be careful about how much contact they have with an old client to avoid damage due to confusion. The power differential remains. You were the counselor and they were the ones that needed the help. Seeing you out of the professional context may disclose vulnerabilities in you and in them, and they may discount all the help that you have given them. It will be difficult to accept this client professionally in the future, and that's the reason I put this picture. And as you can see, it's very apropos. After the dance is over, stay away from your clients. Don't get involved with them. Most codes of ethics discuss the following ethical issues related to assessing clients. The assessment procedure or instrument should be within your scope of practice, education, and training. If you haven't had any training in doing this, this type of therapy, then don't do it. Clients should be fully informed about the procedure and be included in the procedure in a collaborative way. Appropriate instruments or procedures should be selected based on the assessment question. Assessment instruments and procedures used should be standardized and include normative data appropriate for culturally diverse or disabled clients. When administering, scoring, and interpreting instruments, appropriate procedures should be adhered to. Clients should be given a clear and complete explanation of the assessment results. All test and interview data should be kept secure and released only to individuals who are competent in interpreting the data. Informed consent means full disclosure of the purposes, goals, techniques, and procedure rules for assessment and counseling approaches used in language that is understandable to the client. So if they don't understand what you're talking about, you better figure out a way to explain it to them, because informed consent means that you have to give them all this information and they have to understand it. Legal violations are distinct from ethical violations. Ethical challenges are generally brought before a state licensing board, but can originate from a professional organization. Legal obligations to clients include duty to care, duty to respect privacy, duty to maintain confidentiality, duty to inform, duty to report, and duty to warn. Legal limits to confidentiality. Confidentiality is not absolute. Laws vary by state. It is important to keep up to date in your own state laws concerning confidentiality requirements and expectations. In some states, you can't disclose anything to anyone. In other states, you can disclose information to legal entities like law enforcement or judges. It really all depends. It just depends on the state. Each state has their own laws. Malpractice is defined as negligence in which a professional fails to follow generally accepted standards of the profession, resulting in injury to the client. The client must prove 4 things about the practitioner to recover damages of malpractice. The practitioner owed the client a duty to conform to a particular standard of conduct. The practitioner had an obligation to follow defined standards of care. The practitioner breached that duty by some act of omission or commission in the professional practice. The client or others suffered measurable damage or injury. The practitioner's conduct was the direct or proximate cause of the damage. The top 5 reasons for malpractice of practitioners in the United States are incorrect treatment, sexual impropriety, breach of confidence, failure to diagnose incorrect diagnosis, suicide of the patient. And this order, incorrect treatment, is the number one reason for individuals to be charged with malpractice. And this is actually a counselor in Belfast, Maine, who was arrested for malpractice. If a practitioner loses in court, there may be several consequences. They might be fined for damages, punitive damages. They may have to give further counseling to the individual. They may lose their license. They may lose their reputation. Future difficulties in obtaining malpractice insurance, which is very expensive. In the court cases, whether won or lost, might damage the practitioner financially, emotionally, or professionally. Adhere to up-to-date, so minimizing the risk of ethical or legal challenges, adhere to up-to-date practice methods, good documentation of practices, maintain appropriate boundaries with your clients, know multiple relationships. The following activities may lead to malpractice: sexual relationship with the client, practicing beyond your scope of competency, fraudulent billing, violation of reporting laws, breach of confidentiality, or refusal to provide records. You'd be surprised how often fraudulent billing is the charge. Ethical dilemmas involve making a choice between two or more relevant but contradictory ethical directives, where every alternative results in some type of undesirable outcome for one or more persons. It's a damned if you do, no matter which you pick. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Reamer in 1995 describes two principles that can guide practitioners in resolving ethical dilemmas: beneficence, where the practitioners should take action intended to help or benefit others; non-malfeasance, where the practitioner should act without malice in order to do no harm. Elaine Congress, a social worker, came up with the ethic model of decision making in 2000. Examine all of the relevant client, personal, professional, agency, and societal values, including personal, societal, cultural, agency, client, and professional values. Think about ethical standards of your professional code of ethics and relevant laws. Hypothesize about all the possible consequences of different decisions. Identify all who might benefit and all who might be harmed. It is often necessary to research potential consequences of possible decisions on all those involved. And C, consult with supervisors and colleagues as you begin to formulate choices. When a supervisor, colleague, or consultant is involved, the final decision must take their thoughts into consideration. And that is one way of coming up with a solution for your ethical dilemma. And that is the end of the chapter. Now, one of the things that we need to talk about is the fact that in this class, what I want you to do is create a fictional character for yourself. There's a lot of things that we need to think about when we're thinking of fictional characters. So this fictional character will have a problem that needs to be not solved, but looked into by counselors. And what you will do is you will act as a client, and because you act as a client, you will be the practice client for your fellow classmates, for your classmates. Okay, now there are rules that we have to go by. If you've ever had any problems in the past, then the problem that your fictional client, your character has, cannot have anything to do with any problem that you've had in the past. If someone close to you, a spouse, a sibling, a parent, has had problems, um, then you cannot select that problem for your character. It's too close. It may cause you to have flashbacks, and we certainly don't want you to have any problems just because of this class. So what you need to do is select a problem that you're not close to, that your client can have. Then what I want you to do is research this problem so that you can act appropriately when you're being counseled by your colleagues, by your classmates. Because we're not in a classroom and we can't do this face to face. Actually, I don't think anybody's doing any counseling face to face, especially on the Navajo Nation. We're going to have to do this either by email, by Zoom or Skype or telephone conversation. Online counseling online has become a lot more popular in the last decade or so. It works. It works as well as face to face. A lot of times it's better than counseling face to face. And one of the reasons is because there's a degree of anonymity to it. So that's what I want you to do. Everybody's going to have to come up with a character. Last semester, we had a problem getting people to do this, to come up with their character, and only about 2/3 of the class actually did it, and the rest of the class didn't pass the class. It's possible if you do everything else that you can pass the class, but you better do everything else really well. The paper is worth 100 points. The character, your character history, which there's a copy of it. There's a copy of it online. Let me see if I can go to that and show you what I'm talking about. This is 291. There we go. There's character history right here. So if you click on that, then you can open up your character history. And this is a docs form, and you can just fill it out, I think. Yeah, you can just fill it out. Whoops. Anyway, I won't say that. Yeah, and it's not very long, and you just talk about what your problem is. So everybody needs to come up with a problem that they can use. Um, it doesn't have to be a severe problem. We don't really have to have somebody with any schizophrenia or anything, but it needs to be something that you're not close to. If you've ever suffered from depression or anxiety, then do not select those. Otherwise, you may develop that problem again, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so that's what you need to do. What do you need to do to pass a class? Wait a minute. Let's see. There we go. Okay, what do you need to do to pass a class? And here are the class requirements. There will be 15 quizzes, and each one is 10 points each. That's 150 points. On the 5-page paper, your 5-page paper needs to be about the problem that your character has, and I want you to write that within the next couple months, so that you understand. We're going to start counseling after the 10th week, and I can't remember when that is. I can find out in just a second. There we go. When is the 10th week? We'll start counseling in April, it looks like. Yeah, start counseling in April. Okay, uh-oh, I've lost my thing. There we go. That was a mistake. All right. Okay, anyway, so what else do you need to do? You need to write your character history. Wrong. You guys don't need to see my email. Wait a minute. Having a bit of trouble here. There we go. I'm doing this one-handed. I guess you can't really do this two-handed, can you? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Is this the right class? 291? Oh, it's 240. Gee, Christmas. There we go. Okay. Okay, so take 150 points for the quizzes, 100 points for the paper, answer discussion questions, that's another 100 points, one for each week. Fictional biography is 50 points. And your counseling sessions are another 100 points. Now you got 500 points. So if you don't do the counseling session and you don't do the fictional biography, that's 350. Let's divide 35 into 50 into 35 and see if you pass. You'd have to get 100 on everything else. 35 divided by 50 equals 70. Ooh, you just barely pass if you got 100 on everything else. But that means you'd write the paper, even though you don't have a fictional biography. Anyway, don't, do your fictional biography. Come up with a problem. There's lots of them out there. Lots of problems. The DSM-5 is, what, 700 pages long, so there's lots of different problems that you can have. Anyway, okay, so I'll talk to you guys next week. So have a good week, and I hope your first week worked out really well.